On August 18, 1920, the 19th Amendment to our Constitution was ratified by the states. This achievement was the result of the courage and determination by generations of women and men. We truly walk in the footsteps of giants.
The Turning Point Suffragist Memorial is going to be the first national memorial to pay tribute to the women who fought for 72 years to win the vote. That created the largest expansion of democracy the country had ever seen. Yet a lot of people don't even know who these women were. We like to call this the best kept secret in American history.
It's important for people to remember this moment, indeed to celebrate it, when women achieved the right to vote. But all of us must remember the shoulders that we stand on. We simply would not have been here without the work that they did, the vision that they had, the success that they achieved.
The Turning Point Suffragist Memorial is important to Virginia because it is a tangible reminder that our voices and our votes matter. It is an opportunity to acknowledge those whose voices have not been heard, whose tremendous contributions to our great nation haven't been acknowledged. We have recognized the great significance of the suffrage centennial throughout this year. We proudly lit the Executive Mansion in purple, white, and gold to celebrate.
Having something like the Turning Point Suffragist Memorial will bring attention to this really significant history and hopefully help us Americans better appreciate these stories and these incredible women.
This is a story that really needs to be told. The story of the suffragists, the stories of the picketers that were arrested for picketing the White House and being sent to the Lorton prison, that all happened right here.
It isn't something that's been in the history books. There are few memorials. Less than 10% of the memorials in this country are to women. We are not represented.
We want you to feel like you were there, like it was 1917 or the 1920 era. So a lot of the memorials designed with that in mind. So you have the bronze statues. Each of the information stations is designed to look like it's a newspaper article from the time. I really wanted you to feel like you were in the moment, that you could have been living in the 1917 era and feel what they felt. We will actually have a 24-foot section of the actual White House fence that the women picketed in front of in 1917.
Turning Point and Nova Parks are the very first entities to get a section of the actual White House fence. And the piece of White House fence that we are getting was actually there when the suffragists were standing in front of it with signs very pointedly asking President Wilson to give women the right to vote.
People can pose in front of the fence, they can look at it, they can understand this is living history, this is real.
Fairfax County is very rich with history throughout the county. We have so many landmarks and things for people to visit. Getting national attention for what we're doing, that strategically where this memorial is very helpful to encouraging people to come to our area and spend some time here.
We are working with Visit Fairfax, which is funded by Fairfax County Tourism. We are working with the Virginia Tourism Corporation throughout the state.
Virginia's history is much richer, much more diverse, and much more complicated than what many of us were taught in school. And this memorial will be an important resource for teaching history that accurately reflects the stories and experiences of everyone.
The Turning Point Suffragist Memorial is only the beginning. Once the memorial is built, we have plans to create a Turning Point Institute where we bring in women, young girls, and kind of train them in some of the traits of the suffragists and how to become leaders themselves.
My name is Alice Paul Tapper, and I'm 12 years old. Without my mom naming me Alice Paul, I probably wouldn't have learned about her story. I really saw what the suffrage movement was like for those women, and it inspired me to be brave in my class. I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about my experiences and raising my hand in class. And someone from Penguin Books saw my op-ed and asked me if I wanted to write a book.
I have a young daughter who's going into middle school next year, And she needs to understand that, there were a lot of sacrifices made by a lot of people to achieve equality in a lot of areas. And we certainly understand in times like this that there's still more work to be done.
And people are still trying to fight to have a voice in their government. And this just shows you that this is a continuing battle that we must still fight.
It's a hopeful project. It's a project about the future and hope and education to me, because that's the way that people succeed.
This memorial will stand in perpetuity to honor the bravery, the courage, and the commitment that these women had. It's going to be a beacon to young people growing up understanding that this is the sacrifice that was made for them.
Good afternoon. I'm Pat Worth. I am the Executive Director and the CEO of the Turning Point Suffragist Memorial Association. Welcome to those who are able to be with us today in person under COVID restrictions, and a big welcome to those of you who have virtually joined us today from every corner of our country. It is a very special day indeed as we come together after 14 years to dedicate and celebrate the near completion of the National Turning Point Suffragist Memorial. Supply chain challenges and workers stricken with COVID prevented us from making it 100% over the finish line, but we should be finished with everything in just a couple of weeks. We are gathered here today on May 16th, 2021 in Occoquan Regional Park, Lorton, Virginia, about 25 miles southwest of Washington, D.C., on part of the historic prison grounds where scores of suffragists known as the Silent Sentinels were imprisoned in 1917 after illegally being arrested and jailed for picketing the White House. We would not have reached today's dedication milestone without the collaborative effort of each and every one of you with us today, as well as thousands of others across the country. We are so very grateful for this support. Today, we have with us 4 young ladies from Girl Scout Senior Troop 1600. In 1920, in the first national election after the 19th Amendment was passed, Girl Scouts made themselves available to babysit so women could go to the polls and vote. I invite those of you with us here in person now to please stand. Troop 1600, advance the colors. Post the colors. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Color guard dismissed. Thank you, ladies. You may be seated. Today, you are going to hear from our founding partners and a variety of special guests who will share with you why this memorial is important to them, their organizations, as well as its importance to Fairfax County, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and the United States of America. This is the only suffragist memorial in the country to honor every single suffragist who fought from 1848 to 1920 and to tell the entire story of the suffrage movement. The Turning Point Suffragist Memorial will serve as a visual symbol to elevate these women, most of whom are unknown, to their proper place in history. As our board member John Hauser likes to say, and you just heard in the video, it's a story that needed to be told. We believe that you will applaud the unique way in which we have told this herstory. At the conclusion of today's remarks, please join us outside to witness the ribbon cutting, after which you are invited to tour the memorial. Our mistress of ceremonies today is Nancy Lyons Sargent, Turning Point's chairman of the board. Nancy is a broadcast journalist currently working as an anchor and reporter for Bloomberg Radio. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Nancy.
Well, it is a wonderful day. Thank you very much, Pat. It is very exciting. We'd like to welcome some of our special guests here today. We have Virginia State Senators George Barker and Adam Ebbin, Fairfax County Board Supervisor Dan Stork, who will be speaking, Occoquan Mayor Ernie Porta, and Nova Park's entire board of directors, or a good portion of the entire board of directors. We are also here today recognizing the millions of women and men who fought for 72 years so that a woman's right to vote would be enshrined in the 19th Amendment. Their story until now has, as Pat said, largely been untold. Reduced to maybe a box in a school textbook with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony. But so many others planned and struggled and devoted much of their lives to the women's vote. They have long deserved recognition and celebration. Let's celebrate Alice Paul, who took what was then considered the radical fight for suffrage right up to President Wilson's front steps. She and other silent sentinels endured all kinds of weather and unjust imprisonment, even torture, so that women would be heard and their votes counted. Let's celebrate Carrie Chapman Catt, whose winning plan carefully coordinated state suffrage campaigns with the drive for a constitutional amendment. She kept up the fight after 1920, establishing the League of Women Voters. And let's celebrate Mary Church Terrell, who helped start the National Association of Colored Women and whose words, "Lifting as we climb," became the organization's motto. Terrell herself stood in front of the White House with her daughter during the suffrage protest of 1917 and made women's voting rights one of the organization's singular causes. These three iconic suffragists are part of the memorial here, with statues courtesy of the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. Thank you really is not enough. The other tributes here are both beautiful and profound in their meaning. There is a bridge symbolizing the advancement of the movement, the continuing push for equality. It'll be used by one of our early partners, the Girl Scouts of America, for their traditional bridging ceremonies. We have 19 informational stations, 19, no accident. They were developed by a team of historians to detail the arc of the suffrage movement and make clear that the ratification of the 19th Amendment was the beginning and not the end. It would take another 4 years for Native Americans to be considered citizens with voting rights. For some Asian Americans, the vote would come even later, and many black women could not freely vote until 1965 because of discriminatory practices like poll taxes and literacy tests. Even today, the fight goes on to make sure that women everywhere have and keep their right to vote. We also have a suffragist commemorative wall. It lists the nearly 100 suffragists who were imprisoned in 1917, many just a short distance away from here, some of them surviving unspeakable terror, even force-feeding, that was meant to crush their spirit as well as the movement. Instead, that horror would become the turning point that we memorialize here. One of the most treasured elements here is a section of the actual White House fence that became the backdrop for the silent Sentinel protests, again, because of the generosity and partnership of the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. We are the first ever to be loaned a portion of the White House fence for display. Our gratitude really is boundless for that. And lastly, this is a reflective place of beauty. You'll see the gardens, extensive landscaping. It's just a beautiful place to be. It took a team effort over nearly 13 years to complete this memorial at a cost close to $3 million. And included on that team were thousands of donors from 45 states and the District of Columbia, truly establishing this as a national memorial. Many here today deserve thanks for helping bring this memorial to life, to make sure that the greatest story never told now will never be forgotten. Among those deserving are the members of the Turning Point Suffragist Memorial Association's board. I'd like them to stand and be recognized. You'll be able to identify them later because each one of them, like the suffragist, is wearing a yellow rose. I'd also like to thank our Executive Director, Pat Worth, for her contributions, giving speeches, holding meetings, drafting fundraising appeals, and overseeing construction. That just does not scratch the surface of her gifts. Thank you on behalf of the board and behalf of all those who will come to know and share in the outcome of all these efforts. Pat, can you come? We need a Carrie Chapman cap pose. To close, I'd like to quote Susan B. Anthony, who knew that despite all the passion, all the strategy, and all the devotion, the early suffrage fights were immensely worthy but very fragile. This is what she said. "We shall someday be heated, and everybody will think it was always so, just exactly as many young people think that all the privileges, all the freedom, all the enjoyments which woman now possesses were always hers. They have no idea how every single inch of ground that she stands upon today has been gained by the hard work of some little handful of women of the past." Now I'd like to introduce Kate McGinnis-Wyatt, the current board chair of Nova Parks. She represents Loudoun County on the board, and she has served as the Virginia Secretary of Commerce and was founder of the Journey Through Hallowed Ground, which promotes tourism and conservation in Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania.
Good morning. As chair of Nova Parks, it is my privilege on behalf of our board members, and I see some of them with us today, Mike Nardililli, Brian, please stand, Stella Koch, please stand, and I think I saw Jeff Harbert and Paul Baldino, please stand. Thanks, Jeff. On behalf of Paul Gilbert, our executive director, and his outstanding team at Nova Parks. Is Mark Milstein here, our park director, or our park manager? He's out there. Please let him know how much everybody really appreciates his efforts. As importantly, on behalf of the 3 million citizens that we serve every year, we thank you for the opportunity to become stewards of this astonishing gift. By way of background, 40 years after the 19th Amendment, the leaders of Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax City, Fairfax County, Falls Church, and Loudoun County recognized that they worked collaboratively. They could create special places that none could have done individually. So over the 60 years, here we are today with over 12,000 acres, 350 which are right here, 100 miles, 18 miles of which are here, and 34 spectacular places for every citizen to explore, to create new memories, and to learn and be inspired by our shared history. A history which today, because of your efforts over the past 14 years, is so enormously, exponentially enriched. Because of you, we now have the stories of the people who were not known. We get to know the names. We get to be inspired. Because of you, our shared democracy is stronger, because we know that as long as we have been the longest living democracy, it's also still a very fragile state. And these stories help tell the true story of our history and her story, which has often been varnished. Because of you, we will rewrite textbooks and relearn our history about the contributions. And because of you, as stewards of your property, we will be asking all visitors to ask themselves if they have the same courage to step up and do what's right, to continue to support our shared democracy. So on behalf of our board, I want to thank Pat Worth. I want to thank your entire board for 14 hard years of creating this. I want to thank Troop 1600. Thank you, ladies. And I want to thank Fairfax County leadership and the state leadership for understanding this imperative work and the necessity of this work, not just to our state and not just to our nation, but for people worldwide who aspire for suffrage in their own countries. So thank you.
Next, I'd like for Deb Awake to come up. She has served as president of the League of Women Voters of Virginia since 2019. She joined the League in Northern Virginia when she moved here 5 years ago. During her term as president, she says Virginia has ratified the Equal Rights Amendment and moved from the 49th most difficult state in which to vote to now the 12th easiest. So good job, Deb.
Thank you, Nancy. I wish I could take credit for that, but again, it's standing on the shoulders of everyone who came before. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to be here today to celebrate this commemoration. In 1619, a representative democracy was formed on the Virginia shores. Unfortunately, only those who owned property and were white males over the age of 21 were enjoined with that right to vote. And the struggle began for everyone else. In 1848, the convention at Seneca Falls was an expression of public support for the right for women to vote. And in 1917, the Silent Sentinels took their place outside of the White House in a silent protest that stretched for 10 months, culminating in the Night of Terror, when the women suffered torture and abuse and endured that because of the power of the vote. And once they received the power of the vote, because of their fight, it wasn't given to them, they fought for it. They used that power to lift up the powerless and improve their communities. One of the first laws that they fought to pass was child labor laws. In 1919, the League of Women Voters formed out of this right for women to vote, and with the passage of the 19th Amendment. In 2008, members of the Fairfax League of Women Voters, Jane Barker, Janie George, Lois Page, and Mary Grace Lentz, met with Nova Regional Park Authority John Hauser to work on establishing a memorial. Over 39 local, state, regional, and the National League came together in support with $39,000 in donations. And the fight continues for the right to vote, whether it's ballot access in all 50 states or whether it's the fight for DC statehood in our nation's capital. We honor these brave women who fought for this right to vote, and they serve as an inspiration to those of us who continue this fight. Thank you.
Now I'd like to introduce Deb Strahanowski, who is the president-elect of the General Federation of Women's Clubs. Deb has been a GFWC Illinois club woman for 30 years. She's a strong advocate as well for Easter Seals, the United Way, and she's good with numbers. We like that. She works with her husband in an accounting business.
Thank you very much. Oh, I should take this off, right? That's what they say, right? Well, thank you very much, Nancy. And I must say about the numbers, I'm kind of glad that I am here because with the government extending the tax deadline, my husband is at home by himself taking care of all of that. So thank you for having me here this afternoon, and good afternoon to each and every one of you. I am Deb Strahanowski, and I am the president-elect of the General Federation of Women's Clubs. Unfortunately, the international president, Marion St. Clair from South Carolina, could not be with us this afternoon, but sends her best wishes for a wonderful dedication for the Turning Point Memorial. I am a proud officer and active volunteer with GFWC, as we call ourselves, because it's quite a mouthful for the General Federation of Women's Clubs. We do have a long history with the women's suffrage movement. As you all know, the path to the women's suffrage was met with incredible challenges and pitfalls. The persistence, firm resolve of these women and all who supported them for the better part of 72 years is truly remarkable. The women memorialized here are true pioneers, fearless and courageous leaders and heroes to us all. Over the past 5 years, 61 GFWC clubs, states, and regions engaged in fundraising for the memorial. Collectively, we donated more than $55,000. In addition to that, many dedicated GFWC members made generous donations to the memorial. Woohoo! Yay! That is just amazing. I think after hearing that, you will agree that when GFWC members and clubs believe in something, we do the best to make dreams become a reality. I briefly want to let you know how GFWC became passionate about the Turning Point Memorial. It was at a 2016 Board of Directors meeting when Pat was our keynote speaker, where she told a story that many of us had never heard before about the gentleman, Harry Byrne. And it would be a lesson or a story that would play in all of our minds for the last 5 years. He was very, as you know, very instrumental player in the fight for the women's suffrage. So I thought I'd share a little story about some of the factual information that I received from the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. By the middle of 1920, a total of 35 states had voted to ratify the amendment. The problem was we needed 36 states, and the only state left to vote was Tennessee. Harry Burns was a 24-year-old representative in the Tennessee legislature. The state Senate had passed to approve the amendment, but the state representatives still had a vote. And on the day of that anticipated vote, supporters of the suffrage wore yellow roses, as we know, and the anti-suffragists wore red. Well, young Harry Burns arrived wearing a red rose firmly pinned on his lapel. So as it goes on, it comes down to another roll call vote. And this time, Mr. Burns responds with yay when the call came up, and he answered it to vote for the ratification. And wasn't that a great thing? And so it would become the law of the land on August 18th of 1920 that women were granted the right to vote. We celebrate, of course, on August 26th, as this is when the certification date of the amendment. And while the yellow roses were tossed in the air and screams of shout and joy were heard throughout the State House, there's more to the story. In Harry Burns' pocket was a letter that was delivered that morning from his mother, who had urged him to vote for the ratification. He said later that I knew that a mother's advice is always the safest for a boy to follow, and my mother wanted me to vote for the ratification. And with that, we are told he pulled off his red rose and put on his yellow rose, and that's history. It just so happens that Mrs. Burns was a GFWC clubwoman from Tennessee, and she stood in the line to get the vote, to register to vote, and she voted in the October 1st, 1920 election, and it's said that she bears the #1 vote in that state. Again, it is an honor to be here with all of you for this historical, I like that, dedication, and GFWC is proud to be a part of the incredible work that has been done here at the Turning Point Memorial. Thank you so much. What a great day.
We are excited to have with us Dr. Thelma Daily, who is the past national president of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority. Her connection with the Deltas is what brings her here today, but she is also widely known and respected as a social justice advocate who has served and is serving in leadership positions in the NAACP, the National Council of Negro Women, as well as the Delta Sigma Theta sorority.
Do you feel the spirit of the day? If so, give an applause because you feel the spirit of the day. Yeah. You know, I am honored. I am just super honored to be here today to represent Delta Sigma Theta sorority. And many of you are wondering, why Delta Sigma Theta sorority? I'll tell you a little bit later. But I stand here to represent our national president, Mrs. Beverly Smith in Atlanta, Georgia, and the members of the 1,062 chapters scattered throughout the world. Now, possibly no one in this room was born in 1913. No one was born in 1913. But 22 visionary, restless, action-oriented college co-eds gave birth to Delta Sigma Theta sorority on January the 13th, 1913 at the renowned Howard University. Now, because those scholarly, feisty, noble, social action-oriented co-eds joined the March 3rd, 1913 suffrage parade down Pennsylvania Avenue in the nation's capital, gives credence to my attendance here today at this historic moment in American history. They became suffragettes, possibly without even realizing that they were becoming suffragettes and what their steps would mean in the future. But they strategically recruited Mary Church Terrell as an honorary member, along with Nanny Burroughs, both long-term suffragettes. And along came some other Deltas who were suffragettes that they made Deltas, like Holly Quinn Brown, Mary McLeod Bethune, Daisy Lampkins, Alice Dunbar Nelson, and Margaret Murray Washington. And, you know, I was here in 2029 to break ground as the official representative for Delta Sigma Theta sorority. At that moment, a seed was planted in Delta's relationship with the Turning Point Suffragette Memorial Executive Director, CEO, you know her name, Ms. Pat Worth, and members of the Memorial Board, and the visionary concept of the National Memorial. That seed, in terms of relationship, metamorphically has grown and grown and grown, and may be viewed as an indestructible tree that cannot be knocked down. Since the shoveling of the soil in November 2019, the seed has been nurtured in several ways. Wonderful shared experiences with Delta and the Turning Point Memorial Association personnel. And I have to have Mrs. Worth tell you about the wonderful experiences we have had and she has had with Delta Sigma Theta sorority. And even with the many, many Deltas and the Delta chapters across this country, and even having Delta, and I wasn't going to say the amount of money, but you, Miss Accountant, said your amount of money, and I'm going to say even with Delta giving $100,000 toward the memorial. And many of the chapters and individuals also serving as donors. I have to tell you, this is a special day, and Delta is honored to have history recognize her pivotal role in the struggle for the 19th Amendment, because many, many persons of my color were kind of overlooked and not always wanted to be in the struggle. And to have us recognize in terms of the role we played for the passage of the 19th Amendment. And we are ecstatic also to have Delta's second honorary member, Mary Church Terrell, sculpted in one of the three busts. That is so special. I have to say, this is a glorious day in the history of women. And this is a super, super glorious day in the history of America. On behalf of the 22 Delta founders and all who have ever been inducted into Delta Sigma Theta sorority, and our national president, Mrs. Beverly Smith, I sincerely thank you.
Now I'd like to invite Delegate Cathy Tran to come up. The memorial is located in her district. She was helping grease the wheels in Richmond for the memorial to receive a grant of $250,000, and it worked. We are very thankful to the state and to Cathy. She fled Vietnam with her parents at just 7 months old and has given back to the community through her work through the Labor Department and the National Immigration Forum, and now by serving her constituents in the 42nd District. Cathy.
Good afternoon. I feel very emotional being here today. I also have some pollen in my eyes, so if I'm crying, it's a mixture of both. But I'm Cathy Tran, and I'm honored to represent our community, the 42nd District in the Virginia House of Delegates, and how incredibly thrilling it is that we are gathered here for the ribbon cutting for the Turning Point Suffragist Memorial. I remember when I first met Pat, we were at Panera, my go-to place. I had Elise with me, and Pat shared her vision for the memorial. She is an incredible storyteller, as I'm sure you all know, and deeply committed to sharing the history of women's suffrage. She actually even met with my 10-year-old daughter's Girl Scout troop to help them earn their women's suffrage badge earlier this year. The memorial has been an incredible labor of love, And I want to commend Pat and the board for their leadership and perseverance. I'm proud that Virginia state government has provided a total of $275,000 to support the memorial, $250,000 in our budget that passed in 2020, as well as a grant from the Centennial Task Force. And I'd like to acknowledge Senator George Barker and Adam Evan, who are here with us today, as well as Delegate Mark Sickles. Their commitment and their leadership and support help to secure these resources. It's worth noting that the memorial will attract tourism to our area. It will be an important stop on the Constitution Trail, a group of historic sites that tell the story of the evolution of the U.S. Constitution. It also includes, if I may add, George Washington's Mount Vernon Estate and Gunston Hall, both of which are also in the 42nd District. We have a very historic district. But equally important is the memorial's role in educating people of every age about the suffragist movement. The Turning Point Suffragist Memorial is the only national memorial that commemorates 5 million women from every state, creed, race, and nationality that fought for more than 70 years for women to win the right to vote. The memorial is also a reminder that while the right to vote is fundamental to our democracy, these rights do not come without struggle and sacrifice. In fact, in its very name, the memorial commemorates the bravery of the women who, when facing inhumane treatment at the Occoquan workhouse, continued to persist. When word got out about how they were force-fed and beaten, it became the turning point in the suffragist movement and built momentum towards the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And we must acknowledge, while the 19th Amendment was a critical expansion of democracy, suffrage was not truly universal. And as Nancy said in her remarks, it was the beginning and not the end. Black women, Indigenous women, Asian American women, and Latinx women continue to be disenfranchised. But by bringing history alive, the memorial reminds us that our struggle for voting rights is not a relic of the past. We continue to see many efforts today to suppress voters. These laws affect women, especially women of color and working women, so our work is not done. And in Virginia, we have expanded access to the ballot box. In 2020, coincidentally, the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, we moved from being ranked 49th in the country for voter access to being ranked 12th. And as we commemorate the efforts of the suffragists and their dedication to voting rights, let us continue our work for universal suffrage. Thank you so much, and congratulations.
Now we're going to hear from Dr. Colleen Shogun, who served as vice chair of the congressionally appointed Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. Wow, the commission donated the 3 statues, as I mentioned, and was responsible for Turning Point securing the 24-foot section of the historic White House fence from the National Park Service, and you will see that displayed in the memorial. The commission's total support in cash and in kind was $300,000. Dr. Shogun is now Senior Vice President and Director of the David M. Rubenstein Center, which is part of the White House Historical Association, and she previously worked in the U.S. Senate and as a senior executive at the Library of Congress. So, Dr. Shogun.
Well, good afternoon, and I'm really honored to speak here today at this dedication of the Turning Point Memorial, representing the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. The commission was created in 2017 by Congress to ensure that there would be a national celebration of the 19th Amendment. The commission was formed to help lead that commemoration and also to ensure that there was coordination. Of course, we had no idea that we would encounter and face a worldwide pandemic that would alter our plans in significant ways. However, I would say that one of the results, one of the effects of COVID-19 on the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission and our planning, which ultimately ended up being beneficial, was that we shifted to legacy projects. We wanted to find opportunities that had lasting, permanent impact on the promotion and sharing of women's history related to the suffrage movement and the 19th Amendment. I remember when I first came to this site, it was probably 2018. There was no memorial here, just an empty tract of land. But I immediately understood what Pat Worth and her team were trying to do, and I loved it. Situated next to the former Lorton prison, where many women suffered unjust sentences for their freedom of expression of opinion, this was an ideal location for a national memorial honoring the suffragists. But adjacent to a park, I knew that thousands of residents and families would pass by this monument, and they would stop by and experience it. I'm so happy to stand here today and see that vision realized because of the hard work and dedication of the people that made it happen, and we owe them our gratitude. After all, building this memorial was not easy. It took perseverance, much like the suffragists who advocated for the right to vote. The commission contributed the statues of Alice Paul, Mary Church Terrell, and Carrie Chapman Catt to the memorial. We also negotiated with the National Park Service the loan of the historic White House fence. 12 suffragists became the first American citizens to ever protest in front of the White House in January of 1917, and they stood in front of that very fence to make their voices heard. I'd like to recognize the chair of the commission, Susan Combs, who could not be here today. She took the lead in securing the White House fence for this memorial. I can truly say, without Susan's leadership, this crucial piece of suffrage history would not be here today. I would also like to thank Anna Lehman, the Executive Director of the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. She is here in the back with some other members of our staff. She helped lead our partnerships and made sure that our commission plans were executed. Without her energy and passion and the energy and passion of our staff, we would have not enjoyed the success that we had. We did a lot of good work on the commission, including donating thousands of books on women's suffrage to public libraries, supporting the installation of historic markers all across the United States, and producing award-winning podcasts about the suffrage movement. All of these initiatives will enjoy a long trail of impact. However, I really do think that the crowning achievement in this regard is the Turning Point Suffrage Memorial. Now I can say it publicly, it was always my favorite project when I was on the commission. And Anna knows this. I was always the person who was, well, what about the Turning Point Memorial? Can we funnel more money, the Turning Point Memorial? So I'm really glad that my intuition served me well. We know that Alice Paul believed that the turning point in the 70-year women's suffrage movement was the willingness of women to protest and face prison sentences for their beliefs. Both of those things had to happen, according to Alice Paul. Likewise, I truly believe that the tenacity to move forward with this lasting memorial was the turning point in our centennial commemoration of the 19th Amendment. Thank you to everyone who made this happen. Special thanks to Pat Worth and the Turning Point Memorial leadership team. I look forward to working with you in the future to share this memorial with as many people as possible.
Dan Stork is here representing the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. The county is our legacy donor, having given the memorial a cash donation of $800,000 and in-kind donation of donations totaling more than $200,000. So yes, that's well worth applauding. This memorial is in Dan's district. Prior to his position on the Board of Supervisors, he served for 9 years on the Fairfax County School Board, and he has owned several health care and benefits firms and has served on the Board of Good Shepherd Housing, including as board president.
Well, thank you, Nancy. Thank you very much. And Pat, wow, we're actually here, right? You can start to breathe a little bit more and relax a little bit more. I know we're not quite there, but we're close enough, so we're close enough. And to the Turning Point Suffragist Memorial Board and members and, frankly, everybody who's come together to make this happen. I remember going to a meeting a decade ago, and I think it was out in Burke somewhere, where we had a whole bunch of folks, and that was the plan, and to try to move this along. And sometimes things take longer than you expected, but There is a statement about that, thus she persisted, so we think that this is another example of that. And I also want to thank very much Paul Gilbert, and of course the Nova Parks Board, for really being a key part of this and really making this all, helping this all come together. And again, there's so many people here who have been part of that, but I wanted to start particularly with those comments, and then I have a few more to add as we go along. But Fairfax County is obviously very, very pleased to be part of this, have a key role in this. That we're home to many of the first monuments, if you will, places in the country. Delegate Tran mentioned many of those in her district, and obviously a district that we share. And I think we're all equally very, very proud of that. And frankly, a key part of them are, I think, efforts or movements towards equality. Whether it's the revolution that occurred in '76, and the fact that we had the Bill of Rights, we had a Constitution of which George Washington was a key player in that. Obviously, there are many flaws in that, but we kept moving on. A president who, frankly, was willing to step down after 2 terms. Something that I think looking back, we go, wow, he was so far ahead of his time in terms of and that truly was a revolution in that day and age, was a person of power stepping back and moving things forward. There have been so many more since then. We know not only the Emancipation Proclamation and the fact that we had, obviously, the whole suffragist movement was a key part of that, the civil rights movement, and the gay rights movement. So we know that it's a long continuum of things that we've done to try to make this country better. And I'm deeply proud to be a symbol of that, at least in terms of our Board of Supervisors. And I want to thank our board members, particularly the county leadership, both past and present. I want to specifically thank Sharon Boulevard, former chairman Sharon Boulevard. She was absolutely the leader in moving this forward. Anybody who knows Sharon, the more than 30 years she spent in public sector and as a leader, her passion for history was really, frankly, second to none, and somebody who I clearly partnered with on many, many things in our area, particularly at the Workhouse Arts Center. So Jeff McKay, Chairman McKay, who cannot be here today because he is honoring another most important woman in his life, which is his wife, whose its birthday today. So that was an important part of them. And he's done a wonderful job as our new chairman. But I also wanted to thank our vice chair, Penny Gross, who's also spent more than 3 decades in leadership and commitment to women and women's rights, and frankly, rights of all people, the environment. There's so many other areas that she's made such a huge difference. And then my many other current and past colleagues, Supervisor Walter Alcorn, Supervisor John Cook, Supervisor John Faust, Supervisor Pat Harity, Supervisor Cathy Hudgens, Supervisor Rodney Lusk, Supervisor Dahlia Palchik, Supervisor Linda Smith, Supervisor Cathy Smith, and Supervisor James Walkinshaw, all current and past members who had key roles to play in appropriating this money and frankly making sure that this donation would help to really bring this memorial alive. $1 million of cash and in-kind support, and that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that all the many other passions and frankly leadership that's been shown by all the members I just represented to truly get us here. Something that I'm deeply proud of, and ones that I know that you all are here as well. Also, just this past August, we celebrated, obviously, women's right to vote, the 100th anniversary. But also we celebrated at the Workhouse Arts Center an event that my office helped put together because we thought it was incredibly important that we recognize the specialness of that day, 25 million people getting the right to vote. And we held a service at that point to kind of bring in folks, and we held it at the Lucy Burns Museum, which was also an amazing place to learn about our history, and clearly where, in essence, the turning point took place with the imprisonment and the force feeding and the other harm that was done to the women of that time. At that time, the museum had just opened up, and the fact that we were there was a way of honoring the 2 things I think were really crucial, not only, again, the right to vote, but also the fact that we have a place that people can go to actually see some of that background. Here we can celebrate and we can thank the leaders. There we can kind of see the torture and the tough conditions that they went through to frankly lead us all to a better society. Really the whole concept of reformatory, I'm always smiling when I think about this because Theodore Roosevelt, one of the reasons that Lorton was created was it was to be a new way, if you will, a reformation in prison and how we how we help people improve their lives. And the fact that the women were taken there, and if, in essence, their lives were made harder and more miserable, is a statement about how two parts of our society sometimes work against each other, but ultimately to create, I think, the strong outcome that we got today. So that leadership was a huge turning point for all of us. Pat, again, my thanks to you, and our board's thanks to you and your leadership. I know our office has worked with you on pretty much every step of the way, and I want to particularly thank a couple people in my office, and I know one of them can't be here today, but my Chief of Staff, Christine Morin, who has been crucial for all of us in kind of helping to work things through. Kamala Spear, my communications director, has been an essential part of putting so many of the programs together and hopefully and helping to make sure that we honored women appropriately. Additionally, we have Shirley Jenwright, who lives in Mason Neck, and Shirley's been a key part of our communities of concern and frankly social and racial justice, a key part of that. Lisa Sales and her efforts for the Equal Rights Amendment in Virginia, a crucial part of that. And Carly Fiorina. Carly has, as we all, is a national leader, but she's also a local leader, lives in Mason Neck, and has been a key part of helping really, and I know a contributor to all things local and helping us become the kind of quality place we want to be. Irma Clifton, that name hopefully rings a bell with a few of you. Irma is a powerful example of a strong woman who would not take no for an answer, whether it's no about saving this area and protecting the history, but also doing that with a twinkle in her eye, which we all remember, the kind of the tough, firm, the twinkle in her eye, because she knew that we needed to do the right thing and save this history. I also want to thank Laura McKee. Laura McKee is the director of the Lucy Burns Museum and a key person to help to create that museum. And Lucy, thank you very much for your passion and commitment to all of us. And Ann Barnes, who represents us on the History Commission, has been a huge part of our representation of history. Again, for all these people, so much thanks from me and thanks from so many people that have come after you to help us get to where we are today. And I need to obviously thank a key part of my life here, and who's now shaking her head, don't do that, but I want to thank my wife, Deb, for all that I am. And she swears she has a whole bunch of books she's going to write about me, not always in the most positive way. You know, like Waiting for Dan is, I think, the number one thing that's probably a number one title that she's going to write. For any of you who know me, my mother also was a deeply important part of my life. And sorry. At 93, she passed this year, so, but she taught me about caring so deeply about people and making a difference in people's lives and the birds and nature and frankly, all things loving and caring and beautiful in the world. And I will always think of her, particularly in these moments. So the concept of fairness is very important to me. It's driven my life, equality, equity for all. Many are continuing to struggle even long after the 1920s and really even into this present day with the Equal Rights Amendment in Virginia. I know we have far more to do. We are not done with this journey. We need to continue to educate, inspire, and empower all of those present and future generations to remain vigilant in the quest for liberty, freedom, and equality, and while supporting them, as well as my hero once said, to create a more perfect union. So that is all of our journeys, and hopefully we will continue that journey. And again, thank you all very much for the work that you've done to get us here today. Thank
you. And now I'd like to introduce our final speaker, who is Jane Barker, who launched this organization, is now vice chair. She got us going and saw us grow from a committee to a board. And Jane is also the co-founder and co-chair of a large Northern Virginia women's political organization.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome on this oh so happy day. Oh, happy, happy day. Yay, we did it. The people sitting in the room and a whole bunch more deserve so much credit. I couldn't begin to thank you all. But it's time to celebrate and ask 3 pertinent questions about a story that needed to be told, how and who got us here, and oh, did I mention it's time to celebrate? I'm all about that. Question number 1, why do we need this memorial? As an active member in my community and a member of the League of Women Voters, Voting is a large part of my life. My daughter has been a U.S. history teacher, and my supportive husband is our state senator in this district. I know firsthand the importance of every vote, but I didn't know how we women got that right to cast a ballot. This isn't taught in schools, and if I didn't know the story, I'm sure most others didn't know the story either. As distinguished author and on our honorary board member, Eleanor Clift, wrote, quote, "The suffragists engineered the greatest expansion of democracy on a single day the world had ever seen. And yet, suffrage faded from public memory almost as soon as it happened. The leaders built no monuments to themselves, and too many of their names have been lost to history," end quote. Starting today, this first and only place to tell the entire suffragist story is a best-kept secret no longer, here at Turning Point Suffragist Memorial. Okay. Applause. What took so long? In early 2008, staff of Nova Parks met with members of the League of Women Voters of the Fairfax area to discuss an idea that they had. Their early vision was to tell the story, and it was a local story here, of the suffragists who were incarcerated actually at the prison but across the street, and we have a wonderful display in the lobby about that, where you will actually see what it looked like. It's no longer there, but they made this happen, and it was supposed to be just this, as I said, a wall with a few plaques of these women's faces with their names and a few wayside markers to tell the entire story on a small brick-paved area that's now right out here. It's covered with asphalt, as a matter of fact. And it was to be called the Turning Point Plaza. The project was to cost around $25,000, and I naively but readily signed on. I don't know what I was thinking. Gathering some friends and league voters, and league members rather, we started researching. And the more we learned, it became apparent that just a brick wall with a few of their faces and names on there, telling just part of the 72-year-long struggle, wasn't enough. We needed to create a national memorial that was befitting their sacrifices and accomplishments. I remember then park manager, now board member, John Hauser, in his booming voice saying, "Dream big," and we did. Plans were drawn, a speakers bureau was formed, our committee became a board, and we added national and honorary boards. We hired an executive director, dinners, and we had all kinds of events to raise funds, including hosting award ceremonies, dinners, teas, plays, and educational programs. We spoke anywhere and everywhere we were invited, and sometimes pushed to be invited, and began promoting and fundraising all over this country. We turned a small project, recognizing some women with a price tag of about $25,000, into a comprehensive, educational, multi-million-dollar memorial. Raising large amounts of money from the beginning in the recession, as you remember, in 2008, through the pandemic, the only one we've had in a long time, was challenging until the centennial of the 19th Amendment helped loosen some purse strings. Thank you. While it may have taken us 13 years from that original meeting to get this done, that pales in comparison to the 72 years it took to get us women the right to vote. A long time for both, but yes, but also worth it. And question number 3, who got it done? The suffragists earned the right to vote through their own organizing, advocating, strategizing, and demonstrating. Similarly, this memorial was largely the work of women volunteers who, along with a few great men to whom we will be eternally grateful, I have to add, were dedicated, driven, optimistic, and committed to making this happen. Our brilliant interpretation and design committee, led by Emily McCoy, Smithsonian curator Edie Mayo, and many other scholars, worked tirelessly to accurately tell the entire story. Although there were concerns about whether we would ever raise all the money needed, we women never gave up. How could we let these women and so many others who fought so long and so fiercely for this right remain unknown? We did it. Today is the beginning in the next chapter. We invite everyone from across the country, indeed across the world, to come and visit this national memorial. We invite Girl and Boy Scouts, students, families, tourists, and all others to come here and learn the history and enjoy our beautiful memorial in this lovely park setting. Visiting the memorial is free and is easily self-guided. The Occoquan Regional Park is accessible off I-95. This is the ad here. Open every day from dawn till dusk, and guided tours will be available for groups of 10 or more for a nominal cost. As our mission statement, which was created by the board actually I think we were a committee way back in, I want to say 2010 maybe. We were way ahead of our time. As our mission statement says, and which we have now accomplished, we want to leave future generations and you inspired to have a voice in government by voting with an understanding of what happened right here. Coming to the memorial should urge us to pick up the suffragist banners. It should remind us of the importance of every vote in every election and the needed work that needs to continue to ensure the protection of everyone's right to vote, and also to remain vigilant in the quest for equal rights for all. Thank you. And I am honored to be the last speaker here, and now as we proceed to the long-awaited ribbon cutting, our wonderful board chair, Nancy Sargent, will have instructions on how that's going to happen. So.
Well, thanks to all of the speakers today. I think we had a great celebration, dedication ceremony. Now we'll make our way outside. We have a challenge. We're going to try to do this in 12 minutes. Okay, so don't linger. You can come back here later, but if we could get across the street in 12 minutes, that would be great. And for those of you who are watching our stream live at home, you'll be learning some history about the suffrage movement in a special video presentation, followed by then the live stream of the ribbon cutting. I'd like to thank everybody for coming today, and please join us for the ribbon cutting.
Never take for granted what they fought for.
These women started with no power and affected the single largest change to American democracy.
The cultural pushback about whether this was appropriate behavior was huge.
It's a real study in perseverance.
It never got the kind of attention that would make you understand what a daring thing these women did and how much it meant not only this country but the world.
Seneca Falls is often heralded as the beginning of the women's suffrage movement because it was the first organized convention. It was held in 1848 in upstate New York. It was led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott. The most controversial resolution out of all of them was about women's right to vote. And the resolution carried, and it was included in the document.
Women get suffrage in the West long before they ever get it in the East. It really is like a wave moving from the West to the East.
It's no accident that it was big empty states out West that were enfranchising women first. They had very few residents. They were enfranchising everybody to maximize their political power. It wasn't that they were somehow more woke about feminism.
During the Progressive era, say the last quarter of the 1800s, they banded together, had tea parties and women's clubs, and they took on issues like prison reform, school reform, the beginning of the national parks movement. but at the same time training themselves in how to organize.
It was a very segregated period, and women, particularly African-American women, were coming together as a nexus of like minds. I have to go back and admire Mary Church Terrell. She came with a strong background, a lot of culture, very broad-minded.
The National Association of Colored Women was founded by several women. Mary Church Terrell was one of the founders, along with my great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells, in order to create one national organization for Black women.
The movement itself, like a lot of movements, changed over time, and who was for what and when and so forth evolved over those 72 years. So there were some different dynamics in the 1800s than by the time you got into the 1900s.
You have to see it as 3 generations of leadership. Stanton, Anthony Stone, early. Then you have an interim period where Anthony has recruited the next generation, people like Carrie Chapman Catt and Anna Howard Shaw. And then this 3rd generation shows up, these young women, Alice Paul, Lucy Burns. They're all in their 20s, and they take different approaches.
The 1913 suffrage parade was an extraordinary production on so many levels, announcing in this very public way that women's suffrage was important on a federal level. It was really transgressive in 1913.
Although the leadership was primarily, white upper-class women, there were many other women of color working in their own ways.
They formed this whole new group, Delta Sigma Theta sorority, with a service purpose. And it was a suffragette had come to the campus, and she told them they had a double reason for being in the parade. First of all, you're girls, you're women, and then because of your race, you need to be there. So that inspired them.
My great-grandmother refused to march in the back of the parade and inserted herself into the front and center of the Illinois delegation.
In the pictures from that day, it's absolutely shoulder to shoulder. And what you can see is a whole lot of bowler hats. Those were men. They weren't there for the suffrage parade. They were there for the Wilson inauguration the next day.
They threw tomatoes and they yelled epithets and all of that, and it really broke down. People were injured, people were arrested. And while Alice Paul would not have condoned the violence, she immediately saw that this was a public relations opportunity.
That a perfect parade would be in the news for a day, and a mob trying to stop the suffragists from expressing their rights was going to keep the suffrage cause in the news for weeks.
Outdoor tactics, what they referred to as outdoor tactics, the marching, the picketing, the being much more visible in the press, brought in younger women, and that was important. But no protest movement works if it doesn't have direction, if it doesn't have an agenda. And Cat supplied that.
These dramatic moments in history are crystallizing, and they're incredibly important. But in and of themselves, if there aren't people who leave there and go back to somewhere, their local government, their county board, and change the system, that won't be enough.
People opposed suffrage for a lot of different reasons. Some of it was just garden variety sexism. That's just sort of women are too stupid and fragile to handle the vote. Some of it was economics. There were industries that employed child labor that really didn't want women to vote.
Another category of women were wealthy women because they had privilege. They'd married money, they had influence over their husbands. These were not women who were going to be dumped.
These anti-suffrage women really feared an upheaval of the social order, that everything they held dear, everything they said was important, would be thrown out the window because women who wanted to vote were denigrating their values.
Certainly, another contingent of women who are opposed to suffrage were opposed to it because they did not want the enfranchisement of all women, including African-American women. So there's certainly a racial component to this, particularly, as you might imagine, in the southern states.
It's important, I think, also to point out that it was a movement of women and men who supported the full enfranchisement of women in opposition to women and men who did not.
When Inez Mulholland collapsed at a suffrage event at age 30, she was mythologized. And to honor her, women initially marched around the White House, and out of that came the idea of the silent sentinels, which were the suffragists who simply stood outside the White House gates in morning, noon, and night.
I think contemporary activists think they invented everything. The pickets in front of the White House, of course that was making a political point, but how striking are those images? You know, women in dark coats against the White House with these very easy to read sans serif font banners that look great in newspaper photographs. That is the functional equivalent, the 1917 equivalent of taking a message viral.
They were not going to be discouraged, and so they became, in Wilson's mind, a nuisance, and so that began the sort of the sporadic arrests, and those arrests got a lot more serious.
Women had been sent down here to Occoquan beginning in the summer of 17 because the president had decided he had enough. They were beaten, abused, stripped, so the women began hunger strikes. As they were tied down, shackled down, and the tube went down their throat, no nourishment came to their body because they immediately vomited up vile blood, gruel.
One night in the jail, the night that they dubbed it the Night of Terror, a warden, Whitaker, and his men had finally had it with all these suffragists, and they were really brutalizing them. They tied Lucy Burns' hands up over her head and kept her that way all night.
By morning, she had almost suffocated because she could not breathe. It was a horrific experience. The women became weaker and weaker, and pretty soon, Whitaker realized he was going to have martyrs on his hands.
When finally the White House realized that this was a public relations battle they were never going to win, they ordered all the women released.
When all of this got out and went around the world, that was a public humiliation for Wilson. While this was going on, of course, Carrie Chapman Catt is continuing her work. And in January, Wilson went before Congress and gave his support to an amendment giving women the right to vote.
After that, even some of the most troglodyte women can't handle the vote, members of Congress, realized that it was probably inevitable. And so a lot of minds suddenly magically changed.
And it passed the House, it didn't pass the Senate. It was always the Senate that was the problem. Every 6 months or so it was brought up. Finally, it passed by 2 votes, and then the ratification process started.
And Kat says, we're going for this, we're gonna vote in 1920. And she has troops on the ground. Every state had a NASA chapter. Some states were very eager to ratify. Michigan was the first, others came right in line. And I think it's just remarkable that within 12 months, they had 35 states. And you needed 3/4, so that would have been 36.
They just set on Tennessee as being the best hope.
The Tennessee Senate was very much in favor, and so it just moved right through. Then it got to the House, and that was the sticky wicket. And so they had the legislators there who stood up, and you could tell right away which side they were on by the rose that they were wearing on their lapel. And Harry Burns stood up, and as he stood up, he took off his red rose and put on a yellow rose as he said, yay, and passed the amendment.
Harry Burns doesn't appear until the next day at a press conference where he pulls a letter from his mother out of his pocket, says, Dear Harry, I want you to support Mrs. Catt, help Mrs. Catt put the rat in ratification. And Harry, who's 24, a Republican from East Tennessee, says, I know that a boy should always pay attention to his mother. So he changed his vote.
It's quite empowering, I think, to really understand that all those people worked together, even though sometimes they were doing it differently, under that umbrella cause, and it succeeded. I think that is really a good example for a lot of work that's going on today.
Careful reading of the amendment says that the right to vote cannot be abridged by any state on account of sex. So that only meant that states who had complete control over who got to vote lost one reason to discriminate against women. It didn't mean that they didn't have lots of other reasons that they could keep women from voting, and they did.
Even after the 19th Amendment was ratified, African-American women and Native American women did not have the whole privilege. They had to go through poll tests. They had to go through literary tests.
We should commemorate it. We should teach about it. But it didn't include all 27 million eligible American women. But it made a start, And some of those women took the vote and used it. Some did not, and some really had impact on legislation and action. It would take a long time until women really had the impact they have today.
The Turning Point Suffragist Memorial.